The ground shook with every step he took. A giant, a warrior, stronger, taller, and more dangerous than anyone I had ever seen. His armor shone like fire in the sun, his spear was thick as a tree, and his voice rumbled like thunder across the valley. Then he saw me and laughed. A boy, a shepherd, no sword, no armor, just a sling and 5 small stones. Then he shouted, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" The soldiers around me didn't move. They were too afraid. But not me. I had faced danger before, not men, but wild beasts. Lions, bears. They had tried to take my sheep, but each time God gave me the strength to fight and win. This would be no different. The battle was not mine. It was God's. I reached into my pouch and grabbed a smooth stone. I set it in my sling and began to swing. But to understand how I got here, how a simple shepherd boy ended up facing a giant, we have to go back to where it all began. My name is David, and I was never meant to be a warrior. I wasn't the strongest. I wasn't the tallest. I wasn't the one people looked at and thought, "There goes a mighty man of battle." No, I was just a shepherd, the youngest of 8 brothers. My job was simple: watch the sheep, keep them safe, and make sure none wandered too far. It wasn't the life of a soldier. It wasn't a life of glory. It was quiet, ordinary, but I loved it. Out there in the hills, beneath the endless sky, I felt free. The world seemed wide, open, and full of wonder. Days in the fields were long. The sun burned hot and the dust clung to my skin. At night, the air turned cold and the wind whispered through the valleys. But in the stillness, I listened to the rustling of the trees, the soft bleating of the flock, the distant howl of a wolf, and most of all, I listened to God. When I wasn't tending the sheep, I played my harp, singing songs of praise to the Lord. The music filled the air, rising like a prayer. I sang of His greatness, His strength, His faithfulness. And even though no one was there to hear me, I knew He was listening. But being a shepherd wasn't just about watching. It was about protecting, and danger was always near. I remember one night, just as the last light of day faded behind the hills. The flock had settled, the stars had begun to fill the sky. Then I heard it, a low growl in the darkness. My heart pounded. The sheep stirred, their ears twitching. Then, out of the shadows, a lion. It moved like a ghost, silent, deadly, eyes glowing in the moonlight, its gaze locked onto the weakest of my flock. It was hungry. It was ready to kill. Any normal shepherd would have run, but I didn't. I gripped my staff and stepped forward. The lion let out a deep, rumbling roar that shook my chest. My hands trembled, but my feet held firm. Fear pressed against me, but something stronger rose inside me. Faith! I reached for my sling, grabbed a stone, and let it fly. The stone struck hard, but the lion wasn't done. It lunged. In that moment, I felt strength that wasn't my own. My hands found its mane, and before I knew it, I had struck it down. I stood there, breathless, the weight of what had just happened sinking in. That was the day I knew. God had been preparing me for something greater. But the lion wasn't the last test. Another time, it was a bear. Massive, towering, strong enough to tear me apart in an instant. I could see the power in its muscles, the hunger in its eyes, but I fought just as I had before. And once again, God gave me victory. Looking back, I realized I wasn't just tending sheep. I was learning how to trust God, how to fight, how to be fearless in the face of danger. People may have seen me as just a boy, a simple shepherd, but deep down I knew I was being prepared for something far greater than I could ever imagine. And soon, I would find out what that was. It began as just another ordinary day. I was in the fields watching over my father's sheep, the warm breeze carrying the familiar scent of earth and wool. Then I heard my name, a voice calling me back home. I wiped the dust from my face as I ran, my sandals kicking up dry soil. My father, Jesse, stood at the door, waiting. In his hands, a bundle: bread, roasted grain, and cheese. "Take this to your brothers," he said. "Go to the battlefield and bring back word of how they are." My brothers, men of war, trained soldiers in King Saul's army, had been gone for weeks fighting against the Philistines. I wondered how they fared. Were they weary? Were they wounded? I tied the bundle securely, slung it over my shoulder, and set off. The journey stretched long before me. The sun bore down, the road dry and unforgiving. But as I neared the valley of Elah, I heard it before I ever saw it. The distant clamor of metal, the hum of countless voices, the sharp, barking commands of captains. Then I crested the final hill, and there, spread out before me, lay a sight unlike any I had seen. 2 great armies stood, one on each side of the valley, Israelites on one, Philistines on the other. A tense, unbroken line of warriors faced each other across the battlefield. And in the middle, a giant. loomed over the soldiers like a mountain of iron and bronze, his armor glinting in the sunlight, his presence suffocating. His spear was thick as a weaver's beam, and his shield, so vast that another man carried it before him, shone like a wall of metal. He stood alone, unshaken, immovable. Then he spoke. His voice cracked through the valley like a roll of thunder. "Why do you even bother lining up for battle?" he bellowed. "I am the champion of the Philistines. Choose a man, send him to fight me. If he wins, we will be your servants, but if I win, you will be ours." A challenge. I turned, waiting, watching. Surely among Israel's warriors, men trained for battle, someone would rise. But no one moved. I looked to the soldiers near me, their hands gripping their weapons, their faces tight with fear. Warriors who had seen battle, who had fought before, yet now they stood frozen. Then the giant laughed, a deep, hollow sound that echoed through the valley. "Is this the army of the living God?" he taunted. "Is there no one among you brave enough to face me?" Something inside me burned. 40 days. For 40 days, this had continued. Every morning, every evening he had come. He had mocked, he had challenged, and every time Israel had shrunk back. "Who is this man?" I asked, my voice breaking the silence. "Who is this giant that dares to defy the armies of the living God?" The men near me barely glanced up. Some muttered, "Don't you see how big he is?" One murmured, "No one can fight him and live," another whispered. But I wasn't afraid, because I knew something they had forgotten. The God who had delivered me from the lion, the God who had given me victory over the bear, and that same God was with me now, and if he was with me, then Goliath had already lost. I stepped forward, my heart steady, my mind clear. The murmur of the soldiers surrounded me, doubt, disbelief, fear, but I ignored them. I had to see the king. The guards led me through the camp, past rows of warriors who avoided my gaze. Their armor gleamed in the fading sunlight, their weapons sharp, but what good were swords in the hands of men who had already surrendered in their hearts? They whispered as I passed, "A shepherd? What is he doing? He's just a boy." He won't last a moment. I didn't care. I knew something they didn't. Inside the tent, King Saul sat, his brow furrowed, his shoulders slumped. The weight of fear rested heavy upon him, a warrior, a king. Yet today even he seemed smaller than Goliath's shadow. I took a breath and stepped forward. "My lord, do not lose heart. I will fight this Philistine." Silence. Saul's tired eyes studied me, searching for the joke. But I wasn't joking. "You?" he asked, his voice heavy with doubt. "You are only a boy. Goliath has been a warrior since his youth. You don't stand a chance." I met his gaze, unwavering. I knew what he saw, a shepherd, young, unarmed, untested. But he was wrong. "I have been a shepherd, yes," I said. "But I have fought before. When a lion came and stole a sheep from my father's flock, I chased it down. I struck it, and when it turned on me, I grabbed it by the mane and killed it." Saul frowned. I could see the disbelief flickering in his eyes. I stepped closer. "I have done the same with bears, and the same God who delivered me from their claws will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." Saul inhaled deeply, his doubt still lingering. But something had shifted, a flicker of curiosity. He exhaled. "Then go," he said at last, "and may the Lord be with you." He gestured to his attendants, and moments later, they brought his armor, a gleaming bronze helmet, a coat of mail, a heavy iron sword. "Take these," Saul said. "If you must fight, at least wear proper armor." I hesitated as the attendant strapped the armor onto me. The weight pressed down on my shoulders, unfamiliar, suffocating. The helmet slid over my forehead, heavy and stiff. I took a step, then another, but I felt clumsy, slow. This wasn't me. This wasn't how God had trained me. I took a deep breath, then shook my head. "I cannot wear these," I said. "I am not used to them." And with that, I removed every piece. The soldiers watched in stunned silence as I turned and walked away, unarmored, unarmed. Except for my faith. I stepped outside, the cool air washing over me. The battlefield stretched before me, the valley silent but for the distant rumble of Goliath's footsteps. He was pacing, waiting, a giant casting a long shadow. I bent down and picked up 5 smooth stones from the stream, rolling them in my hand. Each one felt familiar, like the ones I had used so many times before. This was what I knew. This was what God had given me. I closed my fingers around them. I wasn't afraid. They laughed at me. Even the king doubted me. But I knew the truth. God had been preparing me for this moment my whole life. And now, the moment had come. The valley stretched before me, silent and waiting. The ground beneath my feet was firm, dry, cracked from the sun. The weight of the moment pressed in from all sides, thick like the dust in the air. I stepped forward, my sling in hand, the 5 stones cool against my fingers. Across the battlefield, the Philistine armies stirred, shifting in anticipation. They saw me now. Then, he moved. Goliath, a living fortress of iron and flesh, towering above the field. His armor burned like molten bronze in the sunlight. Each plate fastened tight, each step he took sinking slightly into the dirt. The massive spear rested effortlessly in his hand, the tip glinting like a serpent's fang. The men of Israel, seasoned warriors trained for battle, stood frozen behind me. None spoke, none moved, but I could hear them. "He's going to die. This is madness. That boy doesn't stand a chance." Still, I walked forward. Then Goliath's voice shattered the stillness. "Am I a dog?" he bellowed, his voice shaking the very stones beneath my feet. "That you come at me with sticks?" A deep, hollow laugh followed, rolling through the valley like distant thunder. He sneered as he looked me up and down, his lip curled in disgust. "You send a boy to fight me?" He spat on the ground, shaking his head. His eyes gleamed with amusement. "Is this the best Israel has to offer?" The Philistine soldiers erupted in laughter, a deafening roar of mockery. Even the Israelites behind me remained silent, shifting uneasily in their armor. I tightened my grip on the sling in my hand. Goliath took another step forward, pointing the tip of his massive spear at my chest. The polished iron glistened, steady and deadly. "Come here," he growled, "and I will give your flesh to the birds and the beasts of the field." He expected me to be afraid. He expected me to tremble, to hesitate, to shrink back as every man before me had. But I wasn't like them. I took another step forward. I could see the flicker of something in his eyes, something different now. Annoyance. No one had ever dared to approach him like this before. And then I spoke. "You come against me with sword and spear," I said, my voice steady, unwavering. "But I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Goliath's sneer faded slightly, his expression darkening. But I didn't stop. "This day," I continued, "the Lord will deliver you into my hands. I will strike you down and cut off your head, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel." Silence. Goliath's grip on his spear tightened. His jaw clenched, his muscles tensed. The laughter from the Philistines died away. I inhaled deeply, letting the truth settle into the air between us. "All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands." A growl rumbled in Goliath's chest, his fury igniting. His fingers curled tighter around his weapon. Then he let out a roar, shaking the very air between us. The sound echoed through the valley. The time for words was over. The battle had begun. The air between us was thick, humming with unseen energy. Goliath's roar still echoed through the valley, but I did not flinch. His massive form shifted, muscles coiling, preparing to charge. The Philistine soldiers behind him pounded their weapons against their shields, their voices rising like a storm, wild and untamed. I tightened my grip on my sling. I could hear my heartbeat, steady, unwavering. Then he moved. Goliath lunged forward, his sheer size making the earth tremble beneath him. His massive legs crushed the dry soil, sending dust billowing into the air. His bronze armor clanked with every step, his shield glinting like a second sun. The Israelites behind me gasped, their fear tangible. "He's too fast. He's too strong. David will be torn apart." But I did not run. I did not hesitate. I reached into my pouch, fingers closing around a single smooth stone. It was cool in my hand, familiar, worn from the river's touch. A simple thing, small, insignificant, but not in God's hands. I set the stone in my sling, and in one motion I began to spin it above my head. The leather straps stretched tight, the air around it whispering as it gained speed. Faster. Faster! Goliath's sneer twisted into something else. Confusion, maybe. Annoyance. He expected me to run. He expected me to tremble. But I was not afraid. I locked eyes with him, and I let the stone fly. Time slowed. The stone sliced through the air, twisting, spinning, faster than thought. The valley seemed to hold its breath. Then, impact. A sickening crack. The stone struck Goliath's forehead with a force that sent a ripple through his body. His massive frame lurched, his head snapping back. His sneer faded, replaced by something else entirely. Shock, disbelief, pain. For a moment he stood. Then, like a great tree, he began to tip. Backward, his arms slackened, his knees buckled. The great champion of the Philistines, undefeated, unstoppable, was falling. The impossible had happened. The ground shook as he crashed into the earth, dust billowing up around him. His weapons fell from his grasp, the mighty spear useless now. The battlefield was silent. I remained motionless, my chest rising and falling in steady breaths. I had done it. The Philistines stood frozen, their eyes locked on their fallen warrior, unable to comprehend what had just happened. The Israelites too were silent until the first shout broke through, then another. Then 1,000 voices. A roar of triumph, of victory, of disbelief turned to celebration. The men who had cowered now surged forward, their courage reborn. The Philistines, once so sure of their champion's invincibility, turned in terror. Goliath was dead, but the battle was not yet over. I took a step forward, the dust swirling around my feet. Slowly, I approached his fallen form. His sword lay beside him, massive, almost too heavy for me to lift. But I bent down, my fingers curling around its hilt. The weight of it was immense. A weapon meant for giants, not shepherds. And yet, with all the strength within me, I lifted it high. With one final stroke, the name of Goliath was erased from the battlefield forever. The battlefield stood frozen in time. Dust still swirled where Goliath had fallen, the air thick with the weight of what had just happened. For a moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The Philistines stared at their fallen champion, their faces pale with disbelief. He had been their giant, their warrior, their symbol of strength. And now, he was nothing but a shadow on the ground. I stood over him, his massive sword still heavy in my grip. My breath was steady, my heart calm. Not because of my own strength, but because I had always known the truth. This battle had never been mine. It had always belonged to the Lord. Then the silence broke. A single voice, an Israelite soldier shouting in triumph. Then another, and suddenly it was like thunder. A roar of victory erupted from behind me as the Israelite army surged forward. The same men who had cowered in fear just moments ago now ran with boldness. Swords raised, shields lifted. They no longer fought for survival. They fought for victory. The Philistines hesitated. Their feet faltered. Then they ran. Their mighty army, the ones who had mocked us, the ones who had laughed as Goliath taunted and terrorized Israel, turned in terror. They fled. I watched as their ranks collapsed, their weapons falling from their hands, their banners trampled beneath their own feet. Chaos consumed them. It was over. The Israelites pursued them, their courage restored, their spirits lifted. A battle they had once believed lost had become their greatest victory. I let out a breath, stepping back from Goliath's fallen form. The weight of his sword still pressed into my palm. I looked down at him, a man who had trusted in his own strength, in his own weapons, in his own power. But power fades, weapons fail, strength crumbles. Only God remains. I turned my gaze to the horizon, the sun beginning to dip, casting long shadows across the valley. The same valley that had echoed with fear that morning was now filled with the sounds of triumph. I let the sword fall from my grip, the metal hitting the ground with a heavy thud. Because I didn't need it. I had never needed it. I looked down at my hands that had once held nothing but a shepherd's staff, hands that had fought lions and bears, hands that had chosen 5 small stones from a stream, hands that had been used by God. And that was enough. I turned, stepping away from Goliath's body. Soldiers rushed past me, cheering my name, calling me a warrior. But I was not a warrior. I was a shepherd, and I always would be. Because God doesn't choose the strongest. He doesn't choose the tallest. He doesn't choose the ones who look like kings or the ones who wear armor. He chooses those who trust him completely, and that is why I won that day. Not because of my own strength, not because of skill or power or might, but because the battle had never been mine to begin with. It had always been his. I turn back to you now, standing in the glow of victory, not as a warrior, but as a witness. You will face giants in your life, giants of fear, giants of doubt, giants that tell you you're not enough. But remember this, the battle is not yours but the Lord's. If God is with you, nothing can stand against you, not the strongest enemy, not the tallest mountain. Trust him, step forward in faith, because when you do, even the mightiest giants will fall.